My sister pushed me through a glass door, leaving me in a 3-week coma. While sitting by my hospital bed, my parents plotted to protect her, whispering I wouldn't remember. So I prepared a devastating trap they never saw coming. This is where the story truly begins, and you won't want to miss what happens. Make sure you're subscribed to see it through to the end. We're always curious. Where in the world are you all watching from today? Let us know in the comments. The very first thing I registered was the rhythmic, relentless beeping of a machine. It was a sharp, synthetic sound that seemed to pierce directly through the thick, foggy haze clouding my brain. I tried to open my eyes, but my eyelids felt as though they had been glued shut, weighed down by an exhaustion so profound it felt like lead in my veins. My mouth was entirely dry, tasting faintly of iodine and old cotton. I attempted to swallow, but a sudden, sharp pain flared in my throat, accompanied by the strange sensation of a tube having recently been removed. Slowly, agonizingly, I managed to flutter my eyes open just a fraction. The harsh, sterile glare of fluorescent lights assaulted my vision, forcing me to quickly squeeze them shut again. Through the blur, I had made out a plain white ceiling and the unmistakable silhouette of medical equipment. I was in a hospital. I tried to move my fingers, intending to reach up and rub my aching head, but my right arm refused to cooperate. It felt immobilized, encased in something heavy and rigid. A cast. A dull, throbbing agony radiated from my shoulder all the way down to my ribs, and every shallow breath I took felt like a desperate negotiation with my own body. As I lay there, trapped in the terrifying purgatory between sleep and full consciousness, I began to hear the hushed, frantic whispers filtering into the room. "You need to keep your voice down, Anthony," a woman muttered, her tone tight with anxiety. I instantly recognized that voice. It was Helen, my mother, but she didn't sound like a mother sitting vigil for a critically injured child. She sounded like someone trying to manage a PR crisis. "I am keeping my voice down," a man snapped back. "Anthony, my father. But we have to get our story absolutely straight before she wakes up. The doctors said the brain swelling has gone down. It could be today, Helen. It could be any minute." I know," Helen whispered, her pacing footsteps echoing faintly on the linoleum floor. "But Layla is falling apart. She hasn't slept in days. You know how delicate her nerves are. If the police come back and ask her more questions, she's going to break down completely." I lay perfectly still, my heart rate beginning to spike, though I prayed the monitor wouldn't betray me. Layla. The name echoed in my mind, triggering a sudden, violent flash of memory. A screaming match in my living room. Layla's face, contorted in an ugly, unrecognizable mask of pure rage. Her hands violently shoving my chest. The terrifying sensation of falling backward, weightless for a split second, followed by the deafening, explosive sound of the patio door shattering around me. The searing pain, and then absolute darkness. "Layla is not going to jail," Anthony said, his voice dropping an octave, taking on a cold, hardened edge that I had rarely heard. "She's just a kid. She didn't mean to do it. It was an accident. We just have to make sure Claire sees it that way." "But what if she remembers?" Helen asked, her voice trembling. "What if Claire remembers that Layla pushed her? We saw the security camera angle from the neighbor's yard, Anthony. If the police get a warrant for that footage..." "The police don't have a reason to look at the neighbor's cameras because we are telling them it was a tragic accident," Anthony interrupted sharply. "Claire tripped. She was wearing those ridiculous heels she always wears, she lost her balance, and she fell backward into the glass. Layla tried to grab her arm to save her, but she missed. That is what happened. Do you understand me?" A heavy silence fell over the room. I could hear the rustle of clothing as Helen likely nodded in agreement. "The doctor said severe concussions usually result in memory loss regarding the traumatic event anyway," Anthony continued, his tone softening into a chillingly practical cadence. "She won't remember the argument. She won't remember the push. We will be right here, holding her hand, and we will gently tell her what happened. She'll believe us. She always trusts us." "And if she doesn't?" Helen pushed. "She will," Anthony said firmly. "Because if she doesn't, we will remind her that destroying her sister's life over an accident will tear this family apart forever. Claire is the responsible one. She'll take the high road. She always does. A single, hot tear leaked from the corner of my closed eye, tracing a slow path down my temple and soaking into the sterile pillowcase. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. I could only lie there, trapped in my broken body, listening as the two people who were supposed to protect me meticulously plotted to cover up the fact that my own sister had nearly killed me. They were standing mere feet away from my broken body, and all they cared about was keeping Layla's precious life intact. The physical pain radiating through my bones was agonizing, but it paled in comparison to the shattering realization of my own worthlessness in their eyes. The betrayal was worse than the diagnosis itself. It took another full day before I mustered the strength and the tactical resolve to fully wake up. When I finally opened my eyes and let out a dry, intentional groan, the room erupted into a flurry of carefully choreographed activity. Helen gasped dramatically, rushing to my bedside, while Anthony hurriedly pressed the nurse call button. "Oh, Claire. Oh, my sweet, sweet girl," Helen cried, leaning over me. Her expensive perfume, a cloying floral scent I had bought for her last Christmas, overwhelmed my senses. She grabbed my uninjured left hand, squeezing it so tightly it ached. "You're awake. We were so terrified. We've been sitting here praying every single day." I blinked slowly, looking at her perfectly applied makeup and her freshly styled hair. She didn't look like a woman who had spent 3 weeks agonizing in a hospital chair. She looked like she had just come from a luncheon. "Mom," I rasped, forcing my voice to sound as weak and confused as possible. It wasn't entirely an act. My throat was still raw and my head pounded incessantly. "What? What happened? Where am I?" Anthony stepped up to the opposite side of the bed, placing a heavy, warm hand on my shoulder. His face was set in a mask of grave, paternal concern. "You're in the hospital, honey. You've been in a coma for 3 weeks." "A coma?" I whispered, letting my eyes widen in feigned shock. "Why? How?" Helen exchanged a fleeting, loaded glance with Anthony before turning back to me, her eyes welling with crocodile tears. "Oh, darling, it was terrible. Simply terrible. You had a horrific accident at the house." "An accident?" I repeated softly, playing the part of the bewildered patient perfectly. "You tripped, sweetheart," Anthony said, his voice smooth and steady, delivering the lie with practiced ease. "You were walking near the back patio and you lost your footing. You always were a bit clumsy. You fell backward, right through the glass door." "Layla was there," Helen chimed in quickly, stroking my hair with trembling fingers. "She saw the whole thing. She tried to catch you, Claire, she really did. She reached out to grab your arm, but she was too late. The poor thing is absolutely traumatized. She blames herself for not being fast enough to save you." It took every ounce of self-control I possessed, every shred of discipline I had cultivated in my years as a financial auditor, not to scream at them. I wanted to rip my hand away from Helen's grasp. I wanted to spit in Anthony's face. I wanted to tell them exactly what I remembered. Layla's screaming face, her hands violently shoving me, the sheer malice in her eyes. Instead, I took a shallow, painful breath and let a look of vague confusion wash over my features. I don't remember," I lied, my voice shaking perfectly. "I don't remember any of that. It's all just blank." Visible relief washed over both of their faces. It was instantaneous and sickening. Anthony's shoulders dropped, and Helen let out a long, shaky exhale, masked as a sigh of sympathy. "That's perfectly normal," the doctor said, Anthony reassured me, patting my shoulder again. "The brain protects itself from trauma. Don't force it, honey. Just rest. Focus on healing." Later that afternoon, the golden child herself graced me with her presence. Layla walked into the hospital room looking like she had just stepped off a fashion shoot. She wore a pristine white designer tracksuit, her hair cascading in perfect, effortless waves down her back. She held an iced coffee in one hand and her oversized smartphone in the other. She stopped at the foot of my bed, looking down at me with an expression that bordered on mild inconvenience rather than concern for a sibling who had nearly died. She took a sip of her coffee, her eyes scanning the bruised, swollen state of my face and the heavy cast on my arm. "Hey," Layla said casually, as if I had merely caught a slight cold. Mom said you were finally awake. You look like you got hit by a truck. Glass door, actually, I replied softly, watching her reaction intently. Layla didn't even flinch. She just rolled her eyes playfully. Right, the door. You always were so clumsy, Claire. Honestly, you scared the life out of Mom and Dad. You need to be more careful. She walked over to the small mirror above the sink in the corner of the room, turning her back to me to inspect her lip gloss. She didn't ask how my pain was. She didn't ask what the doctors had said. She just sighed loudly. Anyway, the coffee downstairs is literal garbage. I had to have someone Postmates this to the lobby. Being in this hospital all day is exhausting. I stared at her back, taking in the sheer audacity of her narcissism. She had pushed me. She had nearly ended my life over a petty dispute, and now she was standing in my recovery room complaining about the quality of the local coffee. Helen and Anthony had shielded her from the consequences of her actions her entire life, creating a monster who genuinely believed she was untouchable. They thought they had won. They thought the truth was buried deep in my injured brain, lost forever to the trauma of the impact. They thought they could spin this narrative, protect Layla, and continue using me as the family's endless source of financial and emotional support. But they had forgotten one crucial thing. When the argument had escalated that day, when Layla had started screaming and throwing things before she ever laid a hand on me, my instincts had kicked in. I hadn't just been standing there passively. I had reached into the pocket of my cardigan, pressed the side button on my smartwatch, and activated the voice memo app. That watch, completely intact and still synced to my phone, was currently sitting in the plastic patient belongings bag securely tucked away in the closet of this very room. To understand how my family arrived at a point where covering up an attempted murder seemed like a logical step, you have to understand the dynamic we had operated under for the last 15 years. I was the eldest, the workhorse, the reliable one. When Anthony's lucrative car dealership business went bankrupt due to his own catastrophic mismanagement when I was 19, I was the one who took a second job to help pay their mortgage while I was going through college. I graduated with honors, became a highly paid financial auditor, and immediately stepped into the role of the family safety net. I paid for Helen's country club memberships because she needed to maintain appearances for her mental health. I bylaid Anthony out of 3 separate, disastrous investment opportunities. And then there was Layla. Layla was the beautiful one, the charismatic one, the one who was destined for greatness according to our parents, even if that greatness never quite materialized into an actual career. Layla wanted to be an actress, so I paid for her moving expenses to Los Angeles. When she quit after 6 months because the auditions were too stressful, I paid for her flight back. She wanted to open a boutique, I cost-signed the lease. When it failed a year later, I absorbed the debt. Currently, she was a 30-year-old lifestyle influencer who lived rent-free in a luxury apartment that I owned, spending her days unboxing PR packages and complaining about how hard her life was. The argument that led to my hospital stay had been about that very apartment. I had finally hit my limit. I was 33, exhausted, and looking to start a life of my own. I had gone to Layla's apartment to tell her I was selling the property and that she had 3 months to find a job and a new place to live. That was the spark that ignited her violent rage. Now, she sat on the edge of my hospital bed, swinging her perfectly manicured foot, acting as though nothing had changed. So, Layla began, putting her iced coffee down on my bedside tray table, dangerously close to my water jug. The doctor said you're going to be in here for at least another week, right? And then you'll need, months of physical therapy. That's what they said, I murmured, keeping my voice raspy. Right, Layla nodded slowly, her eyes tracing the line of my cast. Well, Mom and Dad were talking, and I was thinking too. Since you're going to be so out of it for a while, and you can't exactly type or work, it might be a good idea if we sort out some legal stuff. I narrowed my eyes slightly, feigning confusion. Legal stuff, what do you mean? Layla leaned in, her voice dripping with a sickly sweet, patronizing tone that made my stomach churn. Just, a power of attorney, nothing major. just so someone can handle your bills, manage your accounts, make sure your mortgage gets paid while you're recovering. It's the responsible thing to do, Claire. You don't want to ruin your perfect credit score just because you were clumsy and had a little fall. The sheer brazenness of her request was breathtaking. She hadn't just put me in the hospital. She was now actively trying to use my incapacitated state to seize control of my finances. The very finances she had relied on to fund her entire existence. Mom and Dad agree, Layla continued, entirely oblivious to the cold fury building behind my blank expression. Dad actually already had his lawyer draft up some paperwork. He's going to bring it by tomorrow. You just have to sign on the dotted line, and then you won't have to worry your little head about a thing. We'll take care of everything, Claire. We're family. That's what family does. She reached out and patted my uninjured hand, her touch feeling like ice against my skin. She smiled, a bright, empty, practiced smile that she used for her Instagram photos. Behind her polished exterior, her expensive clothes, and her flawless makeup, there was an absolute void of empathy. She was a parasite, and Helen and Anthony were the hosts willing to let her drain me dry to keep her satisfied. I'll think about it, I said quietly, looking away from her to stare out the window. Don't think too hard, you'll hurt your brain, Layla joked lightly, standing up and smoothing down her tracksuit. I gotta run. I have a brand deal call in 20 minutes. Get some rest, okay? Don't go falling out of bed. She turned and strutted out of the room without a backward glance. As the door clicked shut behind her, the facade I had been maintaining finally dropped. The exhaustion washed over me, but it was quickly eclipsed by a burning, resolute clarity. They wanted to manage my accounts. They wanted to take control of the assets I had broken my back to build. I looked toward the small closet in the corner of the room, where my personal belongings bag sat securely on the shelf. I knew exactly what I had to do, and I knew exactly how I was going to destroy them. The hospital ward grew agonizingly quiet after visiting hours ended. The relentless fluorescent lights in the hallway were dimmed, leaving my room bathed in the soft, rhythmic glow of the heart monitor. The night nurse came in, checked my vitals, adjusted my IV, and quietly slipped out, closing the door behind her. The moment the latch clicked into place, the facade of the helpless, confused victim vanished from my face. Every muscle in my body screamed in protest as I pushed the heavy blankets aside. My right arm was dead weight in its cast, and my ribs felt as though they were bound in barbed wire. Taking a deep, shuddering breath, I swung my legs over the edge of the mattress. The cold linoleum floor sent a shockwave up my spine the second my bare feet touched it. I gripped the heavy metal rail of the bed with my good hand, waiting for the room to stop spinning. Slowly, dragging the IV pole beside me, I shuffled toward the small, narrow closet in the corner of the room. It was only 10 feet away, but it felt like a marathon. When I finally reached it, I pulled open the door and found the clear plastic bag labeled with my name. My bloody clothes from the day of the attack were sealed away, but sitting neatly at the bottom were my personal effects: my keys, my wallet, my smartphone, and my smartwatch. I grabbed the phone and the watch, smuggling them back to my bed like contraband. Sitting on the edge of the mattress, I plugged the phone into the wall charger behind my pillow. The screen lit up, displaying dozens of unread messages, mostly from coworkers asking about my sudden absence, but I ignored them all. I synced the watch, my hands trembling as I opened the voice memo application. There it was. An audio file dated 3 weeks ago, exactly the duration of my coma. I held the phone speaker close to my ear and pressed play. First came the muffled sounds of our argument in my living room. Layla's voice, shrill and entitled, echoed through the tiny speaker. "You can't sell this place, Claire. Where am I supposed to go? You're so selfish. You have so much money, and you're throwing me out on the street." Then came my own voice, exhausted but firm. "It's my property, Layla. I've supported you for years. It's time you supported yourself." What followed was the horrifying crescendo of violence. The unmistakable sound of Layla screaming, a sudden, sharp rustle of fabric as she lunged, my own gasp of shock, and then the deafening, catastrophic crash of shattering glass. The audio captured my heavy, agonizing breathing, and Layla's panicked footsteps running away. But the recording didn't stop there. Because my smartwatch had remained synced to my phone in the hospital bag, the app had continued to capture audio in the background for hours before finally timing out. I fast-forwarded through the sirens and the chaotic voices of paramedics, stopping at a timestamp a few hours later. The voices of my parents filled my ear. "Layla is not going to jail," Anthony's voice hissed through the speaker, chilling me to the bone all over again. "It was an accident. We just have to make sure Claire sees it that way." I stopped the recording. The truth was indisputable. I had the ultimate leverage securely stored on the cloud. They had handed me the very weapon I needed to destroy their carefully constructed lies. But I wasn't just going to expose the push. I was a forensic accountant. I spent my days unraveling complex corporate fraud, tracking hidden assets, and finding the invisible threads of deception that criminals thought were buried. If my family was willing to cover up an attempted murder for money, I knew there had to be more rot beneath the floorboards. I opened my secure email app and began drafting a message to David, a senior partner at my firm and a fiercely loyal mentor who treated me more like family than my actual parents ever did. I explained my situation briefly, leaving out the attempted murder for now, but emphasizing that I suspected my family was attempting to seize my assets while I was hospitalized. "David," I typed, my left thumb flying across the keyboard with practiced speed. "I need an emergency favor. I am authorizing you to enact an immediate freeze on all my primary brokerage accounts, my liquid savings, and the real estate trust. Do not let anything move. Secondly, I need you to run a shadow audit on Anthony's dealership accounts from the last 5 years and Layla's LLC. Pull my credit report immediately. I think they've been using my credentials. Follow the money. Tell no one." I hit send. The trap was set. The investigation had begun. I leaned back against the sterile hospital pillows, the physical pain in my ribs momentarily eclipsed by a cold, calculating determination. I was no longer a daughter or a sister. I was an auditor, and my family was the most corrupt entity I had ever investigated. The next morning, the door to my room swung open with a sickeningly cheerful flourish. Helen practically floated into the room, carrying an oversized bouquet of expensive lilies, followed closely by Anthony, who clutched a sleek, black leather briefcase. "Good morning, our beautiful girl." Helen sang out, arranging the flowers on the windowsill. She came over and kissed my forehead. Her lips felt like ice. "You are looking so much better today. There's real color in your cheeks." "Thanks, Mom," I rasped, making sure to sound suitably weak and pliable. Anthony approached the bed, pulling up a chair and sitting down with a heavy sigh that was meant to convey deep paternal weariness. He placed the briefcase on his lap and snapped the gold latches open. "How is the memory today, sweetheart?" Anthony asked gently, watching my eyes. "Any flashes? Any bits and pieces coming back?" "No," I lied smoothly, staring blankly at the ceiling. "The doctor said this morning that retrograde amnesia is common. I remember waking up here. That's it." Anthony and Helen exchanged another one of their secret, relieved glances. "Well, that's okay. Your brain is healing," Anthony said, his tone shifting into business mode. He pulled a thick stack of stapled papers from the briefcase and produced a heavy silver fountain pen from his breast pocket. "Now, Layla mentioned to you yesterday that we want to take some of the burden off your shoulders while you recover. I had my attorney draw up these documents. It's a standard power of attorney." He laid the paperwork on my lap table. I didn't reach for the pen. Instead, I carefully used my left hand to flip through the pages. I didn't need to read the fine print deeply. My eyes naturally gravitated to the critical clauses. It wasn't a standard, temporary medical power of attorney. It was a durable general power of attorney. If I signed that document, Anthony would have absolute, unchecked authority over every single asset I owned. He could sell my properties, drain my investment portfolios, take out lines of credit in my name, and completely liquidate the wealth I had spent a decade building. It was a financial death warrant. "Dad," I said slowly, keeping my voice soft, almost confused. "This says durable. This gives you control over the real estate trust. It gives you the power to sell the apartment Layla lives in. Anthony's smile tightened just a fraction, a micro-expression of annoyance that I dared to question him. It's just standard legal boilerplate, Claire. The lawyers put all of that in there to cover every base. It just means if there's an emergency with the mortgage, I can handle it so you don't default. You know how complicated real estate is. I do know how complicated it is, I replied, looking directly into his eyes. That's why I've already handled it. The room went completely still. Helen stopped arranging the lilies. Anthony's hand, which had been holding out the silver pen, froze in midair. Handled it. Anthony repeated, his voice dropping its gentle tone. What do you mean, handled it? When I woke up and realized how badly I was injured, I knew I couldn't manage my portfolios, I explained innocently. So, I used my phone to contact my firm. I had them enact an emergency freeze on all my accounts. The savings, the checking, the brokerage, the real estate trust. Everything is locked down in a temporary trust managed by my senior partner until I am medically cleared to resume my duties. Anthony's face drained of color. The transformation was instantaneous and terrifying. The supportive father vanished, replaced by a desperate, cornered man. You froze the accounts. Anthony demanded, his volume rising. Without talking to me, without consulting your family. I thought I was doing the responsible thing, I said, widening my eyes defensively. I didn't want you and Mom to have to worry about my complex finances on top of my medical care. It's totally secure. Nothing can go in, and more importantly, nothing can go out. Undo it, Anthony ordered, standing up from the chair so fast it scraped loudly against the floor. Undo it right now, Claire. You are not in your right mind. You have a brain injury. You can't make financial decisions like this. Anthony, calm down, you're scaring her. Helen intervened weakly, though her eyes were darting nervously around the room. I can't undo it, Dad, I said calmly, relishing the sheer panic radiating from him. It's a security protocol. It requires a notarized signature in person and medical clearance. It might take months. You selfish, ungrateful girl. Anthony suddenly hissed, leaning over the bed, his face inches from mine. The mask had completely shattered. Do you have any idea what you've done? We have obligations, we have bills. My bills are on autopay, Dad, I replied, holding his furious gaze without blinking. Whose obligations are you worried about? He didn't have an answer. He snatched the unsigned power of attorney off my tray table, shoved it into his briefcase, and stormed out of the hospital room without another word. Helen shot me a look of pure venom before scurrying out after him. They had come to quietly steal my life, and I had just locked the vault right in front of their faces. Over the next 4 days, the hospital room became a battleground of tense silence and frantic behind-the-scenes maneuvering. My physical therapy began, a grueling, tear-inducing process of learning how to move my battered body again. But the physical pain was secondary to the digital war I was waging from my bed. David, my senior partner, was a bloodhound. He didn't just look at the surface. He dug deep into the financial bedrock of my family's affairs, and what he sent me in a secure, encrypted file was staggering. The documents proved a history of deception so vast it made my stomach churn. Anthony hadn't just been mismanaging his own money, he had been actively stealing mine. David uncovered a shadow line of credit, opened in my name using my social security number, which Anthony had been using to secretly funnel thousands of dollars into Layla's failing influencer business. Worse, Layla was drowning. The LLC she had set up for her boutique was facing 2 separate lawsuits for unpaid vendor invoices. My parents had known about her impending financial ruin, which was exactly why they had been so desperate to get me to sign the power of attorney. They needed to liquidate my assets to pay off Layla's debts and keep her out of court. I wasn't just a safety net, I was their designated sacrificial lamb. The silence from my family was finally broken on a Thursday afternoon. The door to my room flew open, hitting the wall with a loud bang. Layla stormed in, her face flushed red with rage. She wasn't wearing designer leisure wear today. She looked disheveled, her hair messy, clutching her purse with white-knuckled intensity. What did you do?" Layla shrieked, ignoring the startled nurse who was checking my blood pressure. "Ma'am, you need to keep your voice down," the nurse warned sternly. "Get out." Layla snapped at the nurse. "This is family business." The nurse looked at me. I gave her a subtle nod, indicating I was okay, and she reluctantly left the room, leaving the door slightly ajar. Layla marched up to my bed, pulling a handful of plastic credit cards from her purse and throwing them onto my lap. Every single one of them declined. I was at a client lunch trying to secure a brand deal and my card was declined. The bank said the accounts were frozen due to suspected fraud. "Fix it, Claire. Call them right now and fix it." I looked down at the cards. 2 of them were the corporate cards I had given her years ago for emergencies, which she used like a personal slush fund. But the 3rd card caught my eye. It was a platinum credit card with my name on it, one I had never applied for. "I can't fix it, Layla," I said coldly, picking up the platinum card. "Because I didn't authorize this account. Did Dad open this, or did you forge my signature yourself?" Layla flinched, stepping back slightly, the aggressive momentum draining from her posture. I don't know what you're talking about. Dad handles all the back-end stuff for my business." "Dad opened a fraudulent line of credit in my name to pay for your failing business, Layla," I stated, my voice echoing loudly in the quiet room. "And my firm's auditors found it. The bank froze it because it's a felony." Panic flashed in Layla's eyes, quickly replaced by a vicious, cornered desperation. "You are completely delusional. You hit your head, and now you're making up crazy conspiracy theories." Just then, Anthony and Helen walked into the room, having clearly followed Layla to the hospital. Anthony looked exhausted, his tie undone, the stress of his collapsing financial house of cards visible on his face. "What is going on in here?" Anthony demanded. "She knows about the cards, Dad." Layla cried out, pointing a trembling finger at me. "She locked everything, and she's claiming you committed fraud." Helen gasped, rushing over to Anthony. "Anthony, what is she talking about?" Anthony stared at me, his eyes dark and threatening. He stepped closer to the bed, entirely abandoning the loving father routine. "Listen to me very carefully, Claire. You have suffered a severe, traumatic brain injury. You are hallucinating. You are confused. And you are becoming a danger to the stability of this family." He leaned in, lowering his voice to a menacing whisper. "If you do not call your firm right now and lift that freeze, I will go to the hospital administration. I will tell them your paranoia is escalating. As your father, I will petition a judge for a temporary medical conservatorship. I will have you declared legally incompetent, and I will take control of those accounts whether you like it or not." It was a bold, terrifying threat. They were willing to lock me away in a legal cage of incompetence just to access my bank accounts. They still believed they held all the cards. They still believed I didn't remember the push. They thought my rebellion was purely financial. I looked at Anthony, then at Helen, who was nodding in agreement with his threat, and finally at Layla, who was smirking triumphantly, believing her father had just solved her problems. "A conservatorship," I repeated slowly, letting the word hang in the air. I let a small, defeated sigh escape my lips, playing my part to perfection. Okay, Dad, you win, just give me a few days. The doctors are discharging me this weekend. We'll have a family dinner at my house to celebrate my recovery, and we can sort out all the paperwork then. Just please don't declare me incompetent." Anthony straightened up, a look of profound satisfaction washing over his face. He adjusted his collar, his confidence fully restored. "That's my sensible girl. I knew you would see reason once the confusion cleared. We'll have a wonderful dinner, Claire. We'll get everything back to normal." "Yes," I whispered softly, staring past them at the blank wall, the heavy weight of the audio recording and the financial dossier burning a hole in my digital pocket. "Everything is going to change." The recovery dinner was held the following Sunday at my house, a spacious suburban home I had bought entirely with my own money. It was a bizarre, surreal affair. Helen had ordered expensive catering, using one of the few credit cards Anthony still had working, and decorated the dining room as if we were celebrating a major holiday. The table was set with fine china and crystal. I sat at the head of the table, my right arm still heavily casted and resting on a sling, a large bruise fading to yellow on my cheek. Anthony sat at the opposite end, presiding over the table with the smug satisfaction of a man who believed he had successfully navigated a major crisis. Helen fluttered around, pouring wine, while Layla sat to my left, texting furiously on her phone, occasionally looking up to offer a fake, glittering smile. Even my extended family was there. Aunt Susan and Uncle Robert, my father's wealthy siblings, whom Anthony constantly tried to impress. They had been invited to witness my miraculous recovery, but I knew the real reason they were there. Anthony wanted an audience. He wanted witnesses to prove I was mentally stable and willingly signing over control of my life, forestalling any future questions about where my money went. The air in the room was thick with tension and the smell of expensive roast beef. As Helen cleared the main course plates, Anthony tapped his knife against his wine glass. The room fell silent. "I'd like to propose a toast," Anthony began, standing up slowly, projecting his voice for maximum effect. He raised his glass toward me, his face a perfect mask of paternal pride. "To our Claire. It has been a terrifying month for this family. To see you lying in that hospital bed, unsure if you would ever wake up. It broke our hearts, but you are strong, Claire. You are a fighter, and we are so incredibly grateful to have you back home where you belong." "Hear, hear," Uncle Robert murmured, raising his glass. Anthony didn't sit down. He cleared his throat, pulling a thick manila envelope from the inside pocket of his blazer. He walked slowly around the table, holding the envelope like a peace offering. "As we all know, a trauma like this changes a person," Anthony continued, addressing the room but keeping his eyes fixed on me. "It makes you realize what's important. Family. Support. Claire has realized she needs a long period of rest and rehabilitation, free from the crushing stress of managing her complex portfolio. So, tonight, we are officially lifting that burden from her shoulders." He placed the envelope on the table in front of me, sliding it forward until it touched my plate. It was the durable power of attorney. A shiny new silver pen sat on top of it. "Just sign right there at the bottom, sweetheart," Anthony said softly, his voice echoing in the sudden silence of the dining room. "And we can put all this ugliness behind us." Layla leaned over, tapping the paper with her long, manicured fingernail. "Come on, Claire. Just sign it so we can have dessert." I looked down at the document. Then I looked up, making eye contact with Aunt Susan, then Uncle Robert, and finally Anthony. "I'm sorry, Dad," I said, my voice steady, carrying clearly across the table. "But I won't be signing that." Anthony's fake smile vanished instantly. His face darkened. "Claire, we discussed this at the hospital. Do not make a scene in front of your aunt and uncle." "You threatened to have me committed if I didn't sign it, Anthony," I corrected, using his first name, relishing the shock that registered on his face. "You threatened to declare me legally incompetent so you could steal my assets to cover up your massive financial fraud." Aunt Susan gasped loudly, dropping her fork onto her plate with a sharp clatter. "Anthony, what on earth is she talking about?" "She's confused," Helen cried out shrilly, rushing forward to grab the document. "Claire, please, your head injury." "My head is perfectly fine, Helen," I interrupted, raising my good hand to stop her. "I remember everything, every single detail." I reached into the pocket of my cardigan with my left hand and pulled out my phone. I didn't need to look at the screen. The audio file was already queued up. I placed the phone in the center of the dining table and pressed play, cranking the volume to maximum. The room was instantly filled with the chaotic, screaming sounds of the argument from 3 weeks ago. Layla's shrieking voice echoed off the walls. Then, the sickening thud of the push, my gasp, and the explosive shattering of the glass door. Everyone at the table froze in absolute horror. Layla let out a sharp squeak, her hands flying to her mouth, her eyes wide with terror. But I wasn't finished. I let the recording play through the silence, right into the hospital room. "Layla is not going to jail," Anthony's voice crackled from the speaker, sounding cold and calculating in the silent dining room. "It was an accident. We just have to make sure Claire sees it that way." "And if she doesn't?" Helen's voice asked on the recording. She will, because if she doesn't, we will remind her that destroying her sister's life over an accident will tear this family apart forever. I stopped the recording. The silence that followed was deafening, thick with shock and betrayal. "You pushed her," Aunt Susan whispered, staring at Layla with undisguised disgust. "You nearly killed your own sister, and you tried to cover it up." "It was an accident," Layla screamed, standing up so fast her chair tipped over backward. "I didn't mean to. She was provoking me." "And what about the fraud, Anthony?" Uncle Robert demanded, his voice shaking with anger as he stood up, towering over my father. "Did she provoke you into stealing from her too?" I reached beneath my chair and pulled up a thick binder David had couriered to me that morning. I slammed it onto the table. "This is a complete forensic audit of Anthony's dealership and Layla's LLC. It details over $200,000 in fraudulent loans taken out in my name, signed with forged signatures, to fund Layla's lifestyle." Anthony stumbled backward, his face completely pale, the reality of his total destruction finally settling over him. Claire, please." "I've already sent a copy to my lawyers, Dad," I said coldly, standing up from the table. "And to the police department." Right on cue, as if my words had summoned them, the sharp chime of the doorbell echoed through the house, followed immediately by heavy, authoritative knocking. "Police, open the door." A deep voice shouted from the entryway. Helen burst into hysterical tears, sinking to the floor. Layla started screaming, a high-pitched wail of pure panic, as she tried to run toward the back door, only to realize the police were already shining flashlights through the kitchen windows. Anthony just stood there, paralyzed, his eyes locked on the binder that held the proof of his ruin. The trap had sprung, and it was devastatingly absolute. The police officers who entered my home that evening didn't just have a search warrant. They had an arrest warrant for Layla, based on the audio recording I had provided to detectives earlier that day. Watching her being led out of my house in handcuffs, still wearing her designer clothes, screaming for our parents to fix it, was a surreal, chilling moment. But as the door closed behind her, a profound, undeniable sense of relief washed over me. The parasitic weight I had carried for 15 years was finally gone. Anthony and Helen weren't arrested that night, but their downfall was arguably more severe. The forensic audit triggered an immediate investigation by the state prosecutor's office. Faced with undeniable evidence of wire fraud and identity theft, Anthony's remaining assets were frozen. His reputation in the local business community, which he valued above all else, was completely annihilated overnight. Aunt Susan and Uncle Robert cut off all contact, publicly denouncing them and refusing to help pay for Layla's exorbitant legal fees. Within 2 months, the bank foreclosed on my parents' home. Helen and Anthony were forced to move into a tiny, rundown rental apartment on the outskirts of town, their lives reduced to a humiliating scramble to pay for Layla's criminal defense attorney. Layla eventually pled guilty to felony aggravated assault to avoid trial, receiving a sentence of 3 years in state prison. Her influencer career, built on a foundation of stolen money and fake glamour, vanished entirely. As for me, the healing process was long, both physically and emotionally. It took months of intense physical therapy to regain full use of my arm, and even longer to process the depth of the betrayal I had endured. But for the first time in my adult life, my energy was solely focused on myself. I sat in my home office on a bright Tuesday morning, the sun streaming through the window, casting a warm glow across my desk. My cast was finally off. I logged into my banking portal, watching the numbers on the screen. The funds that Anthony had stolen were slowly being recovered through civil litigation, but more importantly, my accounts were secure. They were mine, and mine alone. I picked up my phone to call David, my senior partner, who had been a rock throughout the entire ordeal. "Hey, Claire," David answered warmly. "How's the arm feeling?" "Almost back to normal, David," I replied, leaning back in my chair and smiling. "I think I'm ready to come back to the office next week." "We'd love to have you back," he said. "The place hasn't been the same without our best investigator, Are you sure you're ready?" "I've never been more ready," I said confidently. I hung up the phone and looked out the window at the peaceful, quiet street. I had survived a violent attack and uncovered a massive web of deceit orchestrated by the people who were supposed to love me. They had tried to silence me, use me, and ultimately discard me. But they had underestimated my strength, my intelligence, and my absolute refusal to be a victim. I hadn't just recovered, I had taken my life back, completely and unapologetically. The nightmare was over, and a new chapter had finally begun.